Recently, I had to make a quick run to Walmart after work for a few smaller items I'd forgotten the day before. About halfway through my trip, I was approached by a woman and a young girl who asked me to buy a pack of diapers for them. Now, I do enjoy helping people out however I can, but something felt incredibly off-putting about this situation. Something about the way she just strode right up to me and asked, almost as if it was very rehearsed. I told her I couldn't do so in the most polite way I could muster. She nodded and went on her own way. I was prepared to deal with potentially having turned away a woman who was genuinely in need of help. But like I mentioned, something still felt very weird about it. I completed the rest of my shopping and was well on my way to just forgetting the entire encounter. When I made my way up to the self-checkout though, suddenly the same lady and little girl appeared out of nowhere and made a beeline right for me. She didn't look at me or speak. She and the girl just started scanning not only the diapers but also items they had hidden in their clothes, racking up a huge total on the self-checkout. I was completely stupefied that she just brazenly assumed I'd pay for all of this. I got the attention of an associate nearby and quietly explained the situation. I wasn't trying to make a scene, but I simply didn't know these people, and I was not about to pay for so many of their belongings. Especially now that I knew it was all a ploy. He told me they'd had to deal with her before, and I wasn't the first customer she'd had a run-in with. He put on his most patient customer service voice and talked to the woman, at which point she pretended not to speak any English, despite having had a pretty firm grasp on it earlier when asking me to buy things for them. She kept pointing at me as if to indicate she and the girl were with me. Thankfully, she wasn't fooling the associate though, who by now had not only cleared her items from my checkout, but also placed himself between me and the woman. She was still pretending she couldn't understand him, and still adamant that we were together. She was getting louder, and things were starting to really escalate now. I made it a point to swiftly pay for my belongings, and hightailed it out of there. I hurried out to my car, closing the door just in time to see the little girl sprinting to catch up with me, the woman not far behind her. Panic set in, and suddenly I was trying to lock the doors, throw my groceries in, and buckle up all at once. The woman arrived and began frantically pounding on my window as I cranked the car, with what I assumed at first was her fist. It wasn't until I got a good look that I caught the sun gleaming off of something. I turned to find that she was hitting it with the tip of a switchblade, making deliberate slicing motions with it. Just about the only thing I could think to do was throw my car into reverse and get the hell out of there. As I did, she and the girl slowly walked in front of my car and started heading back toward the store. As she was walking by though, the woman turned around and gave me what I can only describe as the most sinister smile I've ever seen. Something was deeply insidious about the way she gave me this knowing look. A truly diabolical version of the kind of look a mischievous kid would give you when they know they're doing something they're not supposed to. I was shaken, but ultimately okay in the end, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't look over my shoulder for a long while after. So I moved into a duplex with my ex about 3 years ago in what we thought was a safer part of the city. One of our neighbors, Amber, works in the duplex rental office, and her husband, Ed, was at the time fresh out of prison. Later, we would see all of the swastika tattoos he had. He had been doing and continued to do landscape work for the rentals, like mowing the lawns, cutting down trees, etc. Other than that, he was home mostly doing odds and ends things, like tinkering with his lawnmower or out working on his truck or something. They both appeared to be very nice people, very kind and loving towards others, and always ready to offer to help out. We've smoked weed together a few times even. Ed smoked a lot more than Amber though. We talked about all kinds of things, so I really thought I could trust them and felt very safe being their neighbor. I once mentioned, though, how sometimes when I'm home alone, I hear these steps in the attic above my room and what sounded like a chair being dragged around. Sometimes the noise even appeared to follow me around the house. It always freaked me out, to the point of calling someone just to feel a little bit safer until the noises died down. At that point, Ed said, "What, you think we're spying on you?" It was in a laughing way, but it creeped me out a little how he went right to that. So then, I broke up with my boyfriend and he moved out. That was fairly recent, only about a few months ago. At that point, Ed started texting me often, asking me if I wanted to come over and smoke while Amber was still at work. I declined every time, finding different excuses. I just kind of felt uncomfortable around him. Then he asked if I wanted to have sex with him because he thought Amber was cheating on him. I definitely shut that down. Things were awkward as fuck, really. I didn't tell Amber because I didn't want to get kicked out or have some horrible awkward tension. I also hate confrontation, so I just kept quiet. That's about when I started to hear those noises in the attic above my room more often. It freaked me out even more when I woke up to a loud bang outside my front door at 3 a.m. When I went to examine it, there was a small lockpick outside my door on the ground, but no one around to be seen. I kept the lockpick, and the next day I texted a photo of it to Amber to let her know I thought someone had been creeping around my place. What she told me really surprised me. "Oh, that's Ed's. That's his ice pick, not a lockpick, sweetie. No one can pick your dead bolt with that." I know the difference between a skinny-ass lockpick and an ice pick, though. I'm scared to be alone here, especially at night. Our attics connect together, and it's not outlandish to think he's been up there spying on me. I even looked around a little more closely and found a freshly drilled hole in the ceiling of my room. I just put wadded up paper into it and tried not to think about it. I honestly hope nothing else comes of this, and that I'm just being paranoid. For everyone saying to call the police, I don't really have any evidence. I have the lockpick still and pictures of my door being messed with, but whenever I go into the attic, it's been completely empty. Almost a year ago, I, 24 and male, was fresh out of college. I had just moved into an apartment with my middle school bestie, 23 and female, and her fiancé, 25 and male. This was after a long period of not having seen her in person. My bestie and I had a long and great relationship with few rocky periods. I didn't really know the fiancé that well, but I had met him a couple of times. He came off as occasionally kind of rude and loud, but mostly a very nice guy. I let a lot of little annoying behavior slide though, because she was so in love with him. Really, all I wanted was to spend some time with my best friend. Over the course of a few months, I slowly discovered though that she was trapped in an abusive relationship, with the most classic example of a malignant narcissist imaginable. Their fights, really just him screaming at her while she cried, escalated to the point where he was completely trashing the apartment, breaking her phone and laptop, hiding her car keys, blocking the door, and grabbing her so hard she had bruises. All the while hurling the worst insults he could fathom at the top of his lungs for hours. This man was about a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than me, so there was nothing I could really do other than give her a ride somewhere else away from him until the next day. He didn't like it whenever I did that. Once it reached the point of physical harm against her though, I put my foot down anyway and demanded he move out or I would call the police. He was not technically signed on to the lease, so I could kick him out at any time. He begged me for time to find a new place. He was extremely drunk and high the night he hurt her, and promised to stay sober until he moved away. Not wanting to escalate things, I agreed on the condition nothing like that ever happened again. My friend and her fiancé broke up soon after. 3 weeks passed by and everything was going pretty great. Ex-fiancé had found a new place and was in training for a new job. While still loud and inconsiderate, he hadn't really caused any problems so far. I get ready for bed early. I had an important meeting early the next day. I put on some comfy pajamas usually and lock my door before I change, out of habit. My bestie was out working, and it was just me upstairs in bed. The ex-fiancé was downstairs yelling on the phone about something. I tuned him out and tried to go to sleep. He was going to be moving out next week anyway. My chest rattled though from the booming footfalls coming up the stairs to my room, which woke me up from my sleep. My eyes snapped open to see my bedroom doorknob rattling back and forth. Locked. He let out a yell of pure malice and banged on my door. He screamed my name. The words were so slurred he sounded like he was trying to impersonate a lizard man. The hinges weren't looking so good. We lived in a crappy, cheap apartment with thin doors. I had to do something before he broke the door open, right? I said the only thing I could think of in that moment. What the fuck? Suddenly, the banging and screaming stopped, and the doorknob fell still. After a terrifying moment of silence, he said as flatly as possible, "Open the door, bud. Just come and open the door." I still laugh about that one. Like, after all that, I just walk over and open up for him. Instead, I grabbed my essentials and jumped out the window. I was on the 2nd floor, but we also lived on a hilly slope, so the fall wasn't quite that high. I still managed to fall wrong though and hurt my ankle. I hobbled away as quickly as I could to my car and peeled out of there. I immediately called up my best friend and warned her not to return home. We made plans for her to stay with a friend after she got off work. I made it to the friend's house and passed out for a few hours. I woke up to a call from my bestie. He'd traveled all the way to her workplace with a knife and broken in. He assaulted her and held the knife up to her special needs client's throat, said he'd kill him right in front of her. Thank God a coworker overheard everything from another room and was able to call the police in time for everyone to come out alive. My bestie also said he was on the phone with her while he was banging on the door. He said his goal for the night was to kill me and make her listen. I was totally alone in the apartment with him, sleeping upstairs in my bed. If I hadn't locked my door that night, would I even still be alive? If I had left my car keys downstairs, would I have been able to get away? When I returned to my apartment the next morning, my bedroom door had been completely kicked in. My belongings were scattered everywhere, and the large butcher knives were missing from the kitchen, instead sitting in the corner of the hallway to my room. My first job was at McDonald's. This building was attached to a gas station and located just off a busy highway. I was 14 and had all kinds of bad luck at this age. I started a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. This early, the store was usually empty, so only 3 people, myself included, were in the restaurant. The manager, who was in the back, and the cook, who was also in the back. I, the cashier, was up front. I was wiping down the counter when a man who looked to be in his mid-30s or early 40s came in. He didn't order anything though. Instead, he went straight to the restrooms, which were in the restaurant area just around the corner from my cash. Many truckers and travelers would come in simply to use the washrooms and leave, so this was not too uncommon an occurrence. I didn't really think much of it. After the man finished though, he walked up to the counter and said this. Excuse me, I was just in the washroom and one of the toilets is overflowing. I immediately came around the counter and let him lead me toward the restroom. Suddenly though, I got this terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach and stopped dead in my tracks. I became very aware that no one was in the restaurant area, and the only other two people in the store were in the back. They would not be able to hear me if I went into the restroom. The man had the restroom door propped open and realized I had paused. "Come on in, I'll show ya." It came off innocently enough, but something was not sitting well with me. I smiled at him and said, "One moment, I'll get my manager." I started making my way back to the counter. "Come on, it'll only take a minute," he called out behind me. I met my manager in the back still and explained to him that a man was complaining about an overflowing toilet. My manager went to check it out, and I followed closely behind him. When we turned the corner, though, the man was gone. We entered the restroom, and no such toilet was overflowing. We exchanged a look and never brought it up again. To this day, I feel like some divine intervention must have given me the wisdom to know not to follow that man into the restroom. The whole situation only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like forever. I was young and trusting, and this man could have done God knows what, and I wouldn't have been heard. He could have left and got away with whatever he had planned and hit the highway right away. I never did see the man again after. This story happened when I was a junior in high school. I, a woman, was a friendly and curious person. 1 month into the fall semester, we got this new transfer student. He looked kinda nervous, seated right behind me. His name was Joe. I, of course, introduced myself to him, trying to ease the tension a bit. I showed him what we had learned so far and helped him to look over his class schedule. We had 2 classes and lunch period together. Naturally, we got to know each other and became friends. He was a quiet kid but talked a lot around me. I assumed he was just kind of comfortable around me. I made it very clear we were just friends, and he agreed. We started hanging out with my friends together. Now, fast forward to spring break. I told Joe I was going out of town with my family. He seemed disappointed we couldn't spend the break together, but he thought that was understandable. At some point, though, I ran into Joe in a restaurant. I hadn't told him where I was going, so I thought to myself, wow, what a coincidence. He said his family was visiting the same town. Now, moving on to senior year, Joe and I hung out at least once a week. That then turned into 2 and then into 3. I noticed we were starting to spend too much time together. I wanted to make time for my other friends too. And that's when things started to change. I ran into Joe, or should I say saw him out of the corner in my eye, whenever I would spend time with someone else, or by myself. He started to become very obsessive and clingy. The first 2 to 3 times, I didn't really think that much of it. It all became much more clear, though, when I started to question him one time. He slipped up in that moment and accidentally said he'd followed me because he wanted to make sure I was safe. I felt real betrayed and creeped out. He apologized and asked for forgiveness, but I told him I didn't want to be friends anymore. Of course, he got angry and left. He didn't come to school for the next 2 to 3 days. My friends told me he'd harassed them for snitching on him. He came back to school at some point, though, and we pretended we didn't know each other. On my walk home one day, though, I heard Joe calling my name in a low and unfamiliar tone. He was nowhere to be seen when I looked around. I don't know why, but my gut told me to escape as fast as I could. I started running, and I kept running until I got home. I made sure every window and door was locked. I was convinced I was being paranoid at this point, though. Then my phone started to light up. Joe called me over and over. I then heard him calling my name again from outside. He was in front of my house now, banging on the door. I called my dad and told him what was happening. I pleaded with Joe to stop banging. Everything went completely silent after 5 minutes, which felt like an eternity. The last things I heard from him were, "You'll always be my best friend." The issue was brought to the school, and he never showed up again. Now, 4 years have passed by. Just a few days ago, I got friend requests on 2 of my social medias. It was Joe. I blocked him and changed all my media names to something else. I don't even live in the same town, nor in the same country. I'm now on the other side of the world, but I still can't help but feel scared like 18-year-old me once again. I'm not the friendly person I once was, and I've become cautious around other people because of people like Joe. I was living in a flat share on the outskirts of a city, which is known for generally being very safe. A key is needed to enter the main building, but often the door isn't shut properly, and so doesn't lock. Not really a cause for concern for anyone in the building, as it's a very trusting neighborhood. It was around 2 a.m. or so, and I was laying in bed naked, completely sprawled out. At some point, someone opened my door and entered. I figured it was one of my flatmates going to the balcony. You would have to walk through my room to access it, so it was completely normal that someone might come in at this time of night. I had just smoked a spliff and it was 2 a.m., so I opted to ignore this person and pretend to be asleep. I could feel him just standing there though, and I thought that maybe he was waiting for his girlfriend to join him or something, and maybe he was stood there checking his phone. No big deal. The person went out to the balcony. Took about 2 or 3 minutes. I figured it was definitely him. They were out there smoking a cigarette. They came back in and went back to standing there in total silence. I was half asleep though and didn't really think anything of it. The next morning, my flatmate told me that someone had broken in, came into my room, and went into the room of my flatmate as well. They'd gone through all of his things and gone out into the kitchen. Upon seeing my flatmate wake up from all the noise and come out to see what was going on, they quickly fled from the building. The only thing the person stole was my pair of Marshall headphones. We were all very confused as to why they only stole my headphones, as opposed to the money left on the table, or my flatmate's multiple cameras, for example. We spoke to our neighbors, of which there are around 15 in the building, and none of them had noticed anything out of the ordinary. They hadn't gone into any of the other apartments either. We know that most of the neighbors also don't lock their doors at night. For some reason, it sounds as if this person walked up 3 flights of stairs, ignoring all the other open apartments, with the sole intention of coming to ours. Given their attempt at stealth, it's unlikely they were intoxicated either, and it was not just a mistake. Nothing else really came of it though. The police said they'd keep an eye out, and I had to buy a new pair of headphones. It left me thinking, though, about what would have happened had I fully opened my eyes and alerted this person standing over me. Would they have hurt me? Would it have been a total stranger, or someone who I'd met before? In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment, as I'd finally gotten a steady job. I longed for some sort of freedom, so I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city. I found one that was a 2 or 3 minute walk away from my parents' place. To me, that was perfect. I'd get to live alone, and my parents would still be nearby, so I could visit them whenever I wanted, or pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself was great. Not really much to look at, but for a single man, it was more than enough. My apartment had this long corridor connecting each room together from the sides, with my front door being at the very start of the corridor. My bedroom was the second room on the left, but since the walls were pretty thin, you could pretty much hear literally anyone in the apartment complex. You could hear them walking, talking, anything from my bedroom, or really any room from that matter. Last week, I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really that late, surprisingly, only around 10 o'clock or so. I had the day off, so I took a quick shower and hopped into bed to watch some Netflix. It was probably around midnight or so when I heard a faint knock coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened in for a minute or so. At first, I just thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued to watch Netflix when, once again, I heard a two-motion knock at my door. I got up from my bed and walked slowly over to the door. I looked out through the peephole and sure enough, it was pitch black out there, nobody in sight. I once again shrugged it off and went back to my room, but before I could even sit down properly, I heard a slightly louder double knock. At this point, I thought it must have been a friend playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked if he was knocking at my door. If he was, it wasn't exactly amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at like 7:30 tomorrow." I believed him and hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking had probably heard me. As soon as I hung up, I heard another set of knocks. At this point, I was getting pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door and looked out through the peephole again. I again saw nothing there. I then unlocked the door and took a quick peek out. I still didn't see anyone. I closed the door and locked it. I was so angry though, and combined with being a little bit intoxicated, I decided to wait and catch whoever was doing this. I spent a solid 10 minutes just standing there silently, looking out through the peephole. I was a little bit startled when all of a sudden someone put their hand right over the top of it and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and sprinted out to the apartment hall. I heard someone booking it down the steps and heard them lean against the wall as their jacket brushed up against it. I ran down a few more steps before realizing that whoever this was likely waiting around the corner and trying to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and called the cops instead. They were there within just a few minutes. They scanned the building and the street but couldn't find anyone. They told me it could have just been some kids pulling a prank and to never chase after someone. They kept a patrol car around the entire night, and the knocking stopped as well. It could have been some kids being dumb, sure, but the part that really gave me the creeps was the fact that whoever this was ran down the stairs and hid behind the corner. They didn't keep running away. If they were some pranksters, I find it more likely they would have just booked it outside. All that said, it's been a week and the knocking has since stopped. It's kept me on edge for a few days though, because I always expect to be jumped by someone when walking into my apartment now. So far, nothing has come of it though. This story happened 3 years ago, around the time that COVID started. It was a while back, but still worthy of a share, I think. It was early 2020. I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. I was looking for a place to live, and my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it. Their commute to work was long, so they moved away, and the house was left uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually really close to my own workplace. My sister pretty much offered to rent it out to me for free. All I had to do was pay for the water and electricity, and look after the house as well. I had been living there for a solid 2 or 3 months, and had already gotten used to it. One night, after coming back from work and parking my car, as I started to walk towards the door, I noticed something a bit odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and picked it up to observe it, thinking that maybe it had been mine since I was a smoker. After looking at the brand, though, I realized it was not, and I threw it away properly. I didn't really think that much of it, and shrugged it off as some asshole throwing their trash at my curb. I went on with my night, and nothing unusual really happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted more cigarette butts. this time in the area of my porch instead. Needless to say, I was pretty damn pissed off at the thought of someone sitting on my porch smoking and throwing their trash there, but since I didn't know who it was, there wasn't really anything I could do about it. I noticed that they had been put out pretty recently, so whoever it was had probably walked off when they saw me approaching. That night, I was watching a movie on my laptop, and it was pretty late, past 1 a.m. I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood during COVID, so people rarely ventured out at night. I didn't put that much thought into it though. Around a half hour later, I was very surprised when I heard some chatting nearby. I listened in, but I couldn't quite hear what they were talking about, as their voices seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa. I walked over to the front door to make sure it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two outside approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a low whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was about to break in. I leaned against my front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against it or for the doorknob to be shaken, but instead it was now oddly quiet outside. I decided to walk over to my window to see if maybe they had walked away or changed their mind perhaps. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so you can move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback when I saw that leaning up against my window was a man. He must have been as startled as I was, because he basically tripped over his own feet as he jumped backwards. He tightened his hoodie to cover his face. All I could see was his big blue eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on and immediately started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door refused to budge. The whole time I was staring at them, frozen in fear and trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars back over my window, locking them and running upstairs to the storage room, where I pushed a table in front of the door and called the cops. As I listened, I expected the two to come inside at any minute. I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows being shaken aggressively. When they realized they couldn't get in that way, one of them let out a long, angry scream that probably woke up half the damn neighborhood. By the time the cops arrived, of course, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but they were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I was not keen on staying there anymore, so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. I honestly don't know what they wanted or why they were so determined to get in that night. My story starts in 2014, when I was 10 years old. I had just made a Gmail account, and it made me feel really grown up and mature. I'm thankful I didn't pick something stupid for the address, because I still use it to this day. With my Gmail account, I created a blog, on which I posted book reviews and recommendations. I was kind of a nerd when I was younger. I gave all my classmates the link to my new blog, and I knew every single person that engaged on it because their usernames were all some variation of their real name. One day, however, I received a comment on a post I made by a username I didn't recognize, PinkyPie_. They left very normal comments on my posts. I thought maybe it was also one of my classmates who decided to try out a different username. Honestly, it was a small incident, and I didn't really give it too much thought. Then, about 2 years later in 2016, I made a Roblox YouTube channel, which I've long since deleted. Cringy, I know. I would record gameplay and post it onto my channel. I gained a whopping 18 subscribers or something, I think. One of those subscribers, though, The one that commented regularly on many of my videos was called Pinkie Pie _. This kind of freaked me out because I had made a completely new Gmail for this channel and I had not told anyone about it. Roblox used to be my guilty pleasure, so I kept my channel a secret. I kept brushing off random appearances by this person, commenting on my videos, my blog, my friends' YouTube channels, even my mom's Facebook once, as coincidences. That was until 2019. I was either 14 or 15 when I made my first Reddit account. This was when I was in my K-pop era. I was a regular on r/K-pop and made news-like posts about happenings in the K-pop world. One day, I made a post like usual when I noted that one of the comments was from a user named Pinkie Pie _. The comment was a fairly mundane, typical Reddit thing, so nobody really questioned it or did anything about it, since it was relevant to what my post was talking about. I clearly remember feeling unnerved though, because this person had been showing up on every single social media account I ever created, ever since my very first email account. At this point, I reported that account and deleted my own Reddit. I still kept tabs on that account though. Now we jump to 2020. I was 16 years old and the pandemic had just started. At this time, I was kind of emo, angsty, and insecure, as most people are at least once in their lives. I had not made a TikTok account even though it was all the rage because of literally only one thing: fear of that person finding me once again. It was at this time I discovered 4chan, NSFW warning by the way. 4chan's complete anonymity and my strongest weapon, the Opera browser and its VPN, led me to believe I was 100% safe and protected, even if I was on a website that was basically full of the devil's spawn. I posted normal things mostly. Sometimes I would explore the NSFW side though, and mostly enjoyed talking to strangers on the internet. One day, I was feeling especially brave and horny, so I took 3 to 4 nudes of myself and posted one of them on /B. The post rose to the top because I mentioned I was Asian in the title, which I am, and obviously those guys went crazy over that. I lied about my real age and said I was 18. I shouldn't have done that, and I don't really know what I was thinking. I remember receiving between 400 to 500 replies on my thread. Not all of them were nice, but still, I got a lot of compliments, which really satisfied my ego and made me feel a little better about myself. As I was lurking over my thread though and reading these various comments, I noticed a comment from somebody named Pinkie Pie _. It was another generic comment related to the situation, but this one did not make me feel admired or appreciated. It made me feel sick to my stomach. That was my breaking point. I deleted that thread immediately, then went into a sort of paranoid delusional state. I deleted all of my social media accounts, powered off my phone, shut down my computer, and disconnected the Wi-Fi. I honestly felt like I was going insane. How could this person possibly be showing up literally everywhere I went online? By that time, it had been around 6 years since they'd first showed up. For a couple of years after, I took a break from every type of social media entirely. I got rid of my Instagram, my Snapchat, my Reddit, YouTube. I scanned through everything and made sure it was gone. If I wanted to go on a social media site, I would do it on a VPN and without signing in. This gave me a much-needed break from that person's account. I never did delete my Gmail since I used it for a lot of things though. What's odd is that while this guy had found me on every social media site I used, they never once directly tried to email me. I was 100% sure they must have had my email. For some reason, they just didn't choose to try to contact me. Finally, we get to 2023 and to the present times. Sometime in early January, I decided to make a Reddit account again and mostly just lurk. I posted and commented very little, and I received no comments from Pinkie Pie _. I believe the ordeal was finally over. In November, a few days before my 19th birthday, I went to Japan for my cousin's wedding. I decided to make a Reddit post on r/outfits of my wedding outfit because I really liked it and wanted people to see it. Guess who commented on it immediately? Well, to be honest, I don't know who it was. By the time I read the comment, the account that had written it had been deleted. What they wrote, though, is what shocked me. How is it in Japan, by the way? Liking it more than name of city where I lived? Name of the state where I live, USA? Once again, I was in hysterics. I was 99% sure it was the same guy. Somebody, even if it wasn't who I thought it was though, had somehow just doxed me on the internet. I reported the comment and the user, and once again deleted my post and my account. All I could really do was run. I really need to get this off my chest. I haven't really told a single soul. I feel unsafe all the time and have paranoia-induced hallucinations occasionally. I can't explain to anyone why though.